Are you investing or been thinking about investing in bonds or bond funds and have been wondering what's the difference? On today's video, we're going to do one of our segments called What's the Difference Between Bonds and Bond Funds? Enjoy. Thank you for stopping by the Financial Beat YouTube channel. On this week's video, we're going to jump into what are bonds, right? What are bonds and what are bond funds? Individual bonds versus bond funds. This has become one of my favorite segments we're going to do here. Again, we've done them before. We're going to continue to do these throughout the years on what's the difference. And those of you who haven't yet, go ahead and click subscribe and follow along. Again, I'm a financial advisor, so we have a lot of interesting conversations on this channel, mainly centered around retirement and retirement education. Of course, none of this is ever advice because it's so individual out there. You want to make sure you're consulting with a professional one-on-one on your situation, but just here to give you guys some good insight and some information to look up on or to contact us or a qualified professional. So let's go ahead and dive in here. So many of you out there have heard of bonds, right? So there's been a big misconfusion or confusion, I'll call it, where a lot of people have been asking us, what are the difference between these two? And again, thought this would be a great video. So what is an individual bond? So when you buy individual bonds, right, you're buying a bond that you're putting money into, and it's by an issuer. There's several different credit ratings. It could be A-rated, B-rated, triple B rated, whatever the rating is, right? The lower the rating, typically the more aggressive or risky you could say the bond is. How individual bonds work, typically the cheaper end bonds are typically like $5,000 a bond, give or take, and the more expensive ones could be more like $20,000 per bond. And when you buy a bond, you put the money in there for a duration. Might be 6 months, might be a year, might be 5 years, depending on the bond. And then you typically are hoping you get your principal back at the end of the maturity and regular interest payments. Some could pay monthly, quarterly, it just kind of depends on the bond and what it's doing. But essentially, as you get regular interest payments on it with the hopes and the likelihood of getting your money back at the end of the maturity. The dependence on the getting your money back, what the variant is of course, if the bond is still going to be there. So I think that's why a lot of people like to go with the higher rating of the bonds, because you have a higher chance of getting your money back at the end, plus those interest payments. So it could be a pretty good investment for some people, depending on the situation. Now, those are, most people ask, well, why wouldn't I do an individual bond? The reason why is because a lot of them, like I was saying, are $5,000 or $20,000 per bond. So to buy a bunch of different bonds in there, it might get rather pricey for a lot of you guys starting out putting money away, or a lot of you might not want all that much money tied up into one individual bond. There might be liquidity and things like that to factor in. And so you see a lot of people not wanting to do that because it gets hard to diversify by buying, $20,000 a bond, so to speak. So it's one thing to look at, and that's one of the things that individual bonds might have some pros and some cons in some cases. Now, on the flip side, what a bond fund is, many of you out there that have a 401k, an IRA, things like that, they might actually be in a bond fund. Essentially what that is they might hold many different types of bonds inside that mutual fund or exchange traded fund, which are ETFs. And if you're confused on those, we've done some other videos you could jump on and check out. I believe it's called Mutual Funds versus ETFs, and just gives you some good insight on really what those are. But essentially, it's a collection or a basket of bonds in this case. So now, the nice part about those is they tend to be more liquid. So if you need money out of them, there typically is not a duration on them that is going to, essentially not going to cost you any money to get money out. They typically have more diversification. You own a basket of bonds instead of one bond. And the nice part about it is you own a bunch of different types of bonds. Some might be higher rated, lower rated, and by many different issuers. So you typically have more diversification through those, and they're typically cheaper to buy in. Again, bond funds, some of them are $10 a share or $100 a share, whatever the cost to get into that mutual fund or ETF can be very, very low investment cost to get in. And again, you could typically diversify that way. Again, there's many different bond funds out there that can be categorized differently, but that's essentially really the big difference between the two is one of them, and by the way, I might mention bond funds do have that fluctuation. Again, they can pay a dividend or an income off them sometimes, but for the most part, the principal amount does fluctuate based off ratings and what the performance is of that bond fund. So very important. Many of you guys have been in bonds and said, well, I'm in bonds because they're safe and can't lose any money. That is not always the case. So you want to take a look at what types of bonds you're in or what type of bond funds you're in, because those traditionally can fluctuate just depending on which one we're talking about. So again, hopefully that gave you some good insight on what the difference between bonds versus bond funds are. And if you like that video, go ahead and click like. We appreciate all the support of all you guys checking out these videos, and we look forward to being back here next week with another video. Enjoy.